The Speed Challenge. The dojo was plunged into a tense silence, broken only by the rhythmic sound of breathing and the rustle of gi as they moved. Bruce Lee adjusted the black sash around his waist, his dark eyes fixed on the man in front of him. Mike Stone, karate champion known for his relentless precision, crossed his arms with a confident smile. "They say you're fast, Lee," Stone said, his voice full of challenge. "But I have the fastest hand on the circuit. Let's see if you can keep up." Bruce didn't respond right away. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, as if assessing not only his opponent, but the very essence of what was being proposed. The air around them felt charged, as if electricity from distant thunder hovered over the mat. "Okay," Bruce said finally, with a calm that contrasted with the intensity of the moment. "But we're not just going to measure speed. Let's measure efficiency." Stone laughed, a short, dry sound. "Efficiency? I don't need efficiency. I just need it faster." The two positioned themselves. Bruce, with his feet slightly apart, hands loose at his sides, as if there was no tension in his muscles. Stone, in turn, assumed a classic karate stance, his fists clenched at chest height, ready to fire like a spring. "Whenever you want," Bruce said, almost whispering. Stone didn't hesitate. In a movement that seemed like a blur, his right fist shot towards Bruce's face. But before Stone's hand even made it halfway, Bruce had already dodged it with a slight movement of his head, while his own left hand shot towards his opponent's solar plexus. Bruce's blow wasn't a full punch. It was a touch, precise, controlled, as if he was just testing Stone's reaction. But the impact was enough to make the champion take a step back, eyes widening in surprise. "What was that?" asked Stone, his voice now less arrogant. "You said you had the fastest hand," Bruce replied, still motionless. "But speed without purpose is just movement. I don't need to be faster. It just needs to be before." Stone gritted his teeth, clearly irritated. He wasn't used to being surpassed, much less in something he considered his greatest virtue. "Let's go again," he growled, assuming his posture again. This time, Stone didn't hold back. His attack was a sequence of quick, brutal blows, a storm of punches and kicks that filled the air with sound. Bruce, however, seemed to dance among them. It didn't block, it redirected. Stone's every movement met only emptiness, while Bruce counterattacked with surgical precision, always one step ahead. On the third attack, Bruce didn't dodge. Instead, he intercepted Stone's fist in the air with the palm of his hand, as if catching a fly in mid-flight. Then, with a fluid movement, he rotated his opponent's arm, applying light pressure that caused him to fall to his knees. "Speed is useful," Bruce said, helping Stone to his feet. "But it's just a tool. The real fight is in adaptation." Stone rubbed his wrist, looking at Bruce with a mixture of respect and frustration. "You're not just fast," he murmured. "You are something else." Bruce smiled, a flash of white teeth on his serious face. "I'm nothing else. I'm just what the moment demands." And with that, the dojo returned to silence, but now charged with something new, the understanding that, in the world of martial arts, true mastery was not in being the fastest, but in being the most present. Final chapter, The Weight of Presence. The following days were intense training, but something had changed. Stone no longer moved with just the urgency of someone trying to prove something, he observed. Every breath Bruce takes, every subtle adjustment in his stance, every calculated pause before a strike. He began to understand that speed, after all, was just an illusion when not accompanied by intention. One night, while the other students had already left the dojo, Stone remained, sitting in seiza before the wooden altar where Bruce meditated. The master did not open his eyes, but said, "You want to know what something else is?" It wasn't a question. Stone hesitated before responding. "I want to know how you do it. How he anticipates every move before I even think about it." Bruce finally lifted his eyelids, his dark eyes reflecting the dim light of the flashlights. "Because you still think about movements. I think of you. A heavy silence settled in. Stone felt the weight of those words like a punch to the chest. What if I don't know who I am? He asked, his voice lower than he intended. Bruce stood up as fluidly as ever, approaching until he was just a step away. Then you will never be fast enough. The challenge. 3 weeks later, the dojo received a visit from a foreign fighter, a man named Viktor Kovalenko, known for his brutal technique and never having been defeated. He came not in search of learning, but of reputation, and he had chosen Bruce's dojo as his next trophy. He doesn't fight like us, warned one of the older students, nervously. He breaks bones before the fight even starts. Bruce listened in silence, his fingers drumming lightly on his knee. He's fast, Stone muttered, watching Kovalenko warming up in the courtyard, his movements precise like blades. No, Bruce corrected. He's impatient. On the day of the fight, the dojo was packed. Kovalenko entered first, his muscular body covered in scars, his eyes as cold as steel. Bruce appeared next, barefoot, wearing only the simple kikaji, no sashes, no pomp. He made no provocative gesture, no greeting beyond a slight nod. The gong sounded. Kovalenko struck like lightning, a roundhouse kick intended to crush Bruce's ribs. But the master was not there. He had moved a split second earlier, not away but into the blow, deflecting it with a light touch to his opponent's knee. Kovalenko spun, off balance, and before he could recover, Bruce was behind him, one hand on his shoulder, the other pressing a pressure point on his neck. Yame, said Bruce, quietly. Kovalenko fell to his knees, panting, his eyes wide with disbelief. How? Bruce helped him to his feet, as he had done with Stone weeks before. You fought against what you expected me to be. I fought what you are. The final lesson. That night, Stone found Bruce in the dojo's garden, sitting in front of a small koi pond. The master didn't turn around as he approached. Do you still want to be fast? He asked, throwing a handful of food into the water. Stone watched the fish move, fighting for the grains. I don't know what I want anymore. Bruce smiled, but his eyes were distant. Speed is like these fish. They swim frantically, but they're not going anywhere. True strength is knowing when to stop. Stone sat next to him, his knees touching the damp grass. What if I never learn? Bruce picked up a smooth stone from the ground and twirled it between his fingers. So you've already learned. The wind blew through the trees, rustling the leaves like whispers. Stone closed his eyes and, for the first time, didn't feel the urge to move. It just was. And that, after all, was enough. The weight of silence. The next few days passed like the calm surface of the lake, with no visible waves but deep currents. Stone remained at the temple, helping with simple tasks, sweeping the courtyard, repairing broken tiles, carrying buckets of water from the well. Each task was done slowly, without rushing, as if time had folded in on itself. Bruce watched him from afar, sometimes with a nod, sometimes without any gesture, as if he already knew what was coming. One morning, however, something changed. Stone woke up before dawn, as usual, but instead of the usual silence, he heard muffled voices coming from the main hall. They were urgent tones, almost whispered, but loaded with tension. He approached, his bare feet barely making a sound on the wooden floor. Between the cracks in the half-open door, he saw Bruce with his back turned, talking to 3 men dressed in dark clothes, their short swords visible under their cloaks. One of them pointed to the map unfolded on the table, marking a trail in the mountains. They're moving faster than we expected, one of the men said, his voice rough. If we don't act now, the passage will be taken. Bruce didn't respond right away. He took a brush and drew a slow line over the map, as if each movement were an irrevocable decision. They're not the problem, he said finally. The problem is what they carry. Stone backed away, his heart beating faster. These were no ordinary visitors. They were warriors, and whatever they were discussing was no business for an apprentice. But something was pulling him back. An old memory, from when he still believed that speed could solve everything, when he ran through the streets of a burning city, carrying messages that no one read, running away from shadows that never reached him. He knew what it was like to be used as a tool. And now, here, he smelled the same smell of danger. That night, Bruce called him. "You heard," he said, "it wasn't a question." Stone did not deny it. "Who are they?" "Men who believe that strength lies in taking, not in keeping." Bruce poured tea into 2 cracked ceramic cups. "They want something that doesn't belong to them." "And you're going to help them?" Bruce took a sip, his eyes fixed on the smoke rising from the cup. "No. But I can't stop them either." Stone clenched his fists. "Then why don't you do anything?" "Because not everything that seems immobile is weak." Bruce set down the cup. "Sometimes the real battle is not against others, but against the idea that we need to fight." Stone wanted to scream. "I wanted to shake that man and make him understand that the world outside didn't wait, didn't forgive." But the words died in his throat. Because, deep down, he already knew. Haste had not saved him before. The escape had not freed him from the scars. And now, standing there, he realized that the one thing he had never tried was to stay. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, his voice low. Bruce looked at him as if the answer was obvious. "Nothing." The decision. Early the next morning, the men left. Stone saw them mount their horses, their armor gleaming in the moonlight, and he felt the old instinct to run after them, to prove that he was still fast, still useful. But it didn't move. He stayed next to Bruce, watching until the silhouettes merged with the darkness of the forest. "They're going to die," Stone said, emotionlessly. "Perhaps." Bruce turned to enter the temple. "Or maybe not." "And what are they carrying?" Bruce stopped in the doorway. "Something that shouldn't exist." Stone didn't ask further. "I knew there would be no clear answers." But for the first time, he didn't feel angry about it. The days passed slowly again. Stone continued his tasks, but now there was something different about his movements. It was not slowness out of resignation, but out of choice. When he swept the yard, he let the leaves accumulate before raking them up. When carrying water, he stopped to watch the reflection of the clouds in the bucket. And sometimes, when the wind blew strong, he closed his eyes and let it push him, without resisting. One afternoon, Bruce found him sitting by the lake, throwing rocks into the water. "Do you still dream of speed?" he asked. Stone picked up another rock, twirling it between his fingers. "No. I dream about the sound it makes when it falls." Bruce nodded, as if that was the answer he was expecting. "Then you already know." The last teaching. Winter came early that year. The first snow covered the temple in a thin, silent layer. Bruce fell ill. It wasn't anything sudden, just a cough that wouldn't go away, a weakness that made him lean against the walls. Stone took care of him, preparing herbal teas, keeping the fire going, reading aloud the ancient scrolls that the master loved so much. "You could leave," Bruce said one night, his voice hoarse. "No one would arrest him here." Stone looked at the old man's wrinkled hands, scarred by time like the roots of a tree. "I know." "Then why stay?" "Because I learned that some things don't need to be rushed." Stone smiled. "Not even goodbyes." Bruce closed his eyes, a weak laugh escaping his lips. "You were always a terrible student." And then, without drama, without grand final words, he stopped breathing. The void and the path. Stone buried Bruce in the garden, next to the carp. There was no ceremony, no lamentations. Just the sound of the shovel digging into the frozen earth, and then silence. In the following days, the temple seemed larger, emptier. Stone continued his tasks, but now there was something ritualistic about them, as if each movement was a way to keep the world turning. Sometimes he sat by the lake and talked to the carp, telling them stories Bruce had never heard. Other times, he just stood still, letting the wind pass him by. One morning, he woke up with the feeling that something was different. The air was lighter, the sky clearer. He walked to the temple gate and stopped there, looking at the road that was lost between the mountains. There was no rush. There was no destination. Just the path. And for once, that was enough. He closed the gate behind him and started walking. The first step out of the temple was like diving into uncharted waters. The ground, covered in a thin layer of melted snow, gave way slightly beneath his straw sandals, and the freezing air burned his lungs in a way that, strangely enough, brought him relief. Stone didn't look back. He knew that if he did so, he would only see the curved roof of the temple disappearing into the pine trees, as if it had always been just a mirage. The road wound between low hills, lined with mossy rocks and winter-twisted bushes. He took nothing with him, not coins, not food, not even the staff Bruce used to use on his pilgrimages. Just the clothes he was wearing, the patched cloak that had belonged to the old monk and, in his inner pocket, a small cloth package containing 3 cherry blossom seeds. Bruce had given them to him last night, with a smile that seemed to contain all the secrets in the world. "Plant where you think the land needs them," he had said. Stone hadn't understood it at the time, but now, as he walked, he felt the weight of those seeds like a promise. On the 3rd day, he found a village nestled in the valley. The dark wooden houses had thatched roofs pitched to withstand the snow, and smoke rose lazily from the chimneys. Children played with snowballs near the well, and an old man was repairing a fishing net outside a house. No one greeted him, but no one looked at him suspiciously either. He stopped in the central square, where a fire crackled beneath an iron cauldron, and waited. A woman with a sun-kissed face approached, holding a bowl of steaming soup. "You seem to have come from far away," he said, without asking where. Stone accepted the bowl with a nod. The soup was thin, made from roots and bones, but the warmth spread through his body like a blessing. As he ate, he noticed that the villagers were watching him sideways, as if they were expecting something. It wasn't fear, it wasn't curiosity, it was recognition. "You are the disciple of the monk from the mountain temple," said a gray-bearded man, emerging from the shadow of a house. "What are you doing here?" Stone lowered the bowl. "Walking," he replied. The man frowned, but then let out a dry laugh. "Walking. As if it were simple." He pointed east. "The road there leads to a gorge. They say that whoever passes through it is never the same." "Then maybe I should go that way," Stone said. The man shook his head, but did not insist. "If so, take this." He held out a piece of cloth tied with rope. Inside was a handful of rice and a piece of dried fish. "It's not much, but it's enough to not starve." Stone accepted the package wordlessly. He knew the offer wasn't just food, it was a test, a way to see if he deserved to move on. He put the package in his cloak and continued on his way, feeling the eyes of the village on his back until he rounded the first bend in the road. The gorge was narrower than he had imagined. The stone walls rose like blades on either side, and the wind howled between them like a trapped spirit. The trail was steep, covered in slippery ice, and at some points he had to hold on to the rocks to keep from falling. Halfway there, he found a small cave. Inside, there were the remains of a fire and, leaning against the wall, a dark wooden staff, polished with age. Stone caught him. It was lighter than it looked, and the fit in his palm was perfect, as if it had been made for him. When he left the cave, he saw that the sky had darkened. Heavy clouds gathered over the mountains, and the air smelled of snow. He quickened his pace, but before he could reach the other side of the gorge, the first flakes began to fall. Within minutes, the storm enveloped him, blinding him. Stone crouched down, shielding his face with his hands, and waited. There was nowhere to run. It was then that he heard the sound. It wasn't the wind. It was a cry, weak, almost inaudible, like a child's. He turned toward the sound and, through the curtain of snow, saw a figure huddled against the canyon wall. A girl, no more than 7 or 8 years old, dressed in rags, shivering from the cold. His lips were purple, and his eyes were glassy with exhaustion. Stone approached slowly. "What are you doing here?" he asked, although he knew the answer didn't matter. The girl didn't respond. He just stretched out a trembling hand, as if asking for something that had no name. He took off his cloak and wrapped it around her. Then he picked her up. She was as light as a wounded bird. "Let's go," he said, and began walking back through the gorge, now more slowly, testing each step. The storm lasted all night. When it finally stopped, the sun was already rising, turning the snow pink. Stone emerged from the canyon with the girl in his arms, exhausted but alive. She was still breathing, albeit weakly. He took her to the nearest village, where a peasant family took her in without hesitation. Before leaving, he left the staff he had found in the cave next to the bed where the girl slept. "For when she wakes up," he told the woman who was taking care of her. The following days were easier. The road widened, and the mountains gave way to plains covered in winter-yellowing grass. Stone encountered other travelers, merchants, wandering monks, an old storyteller who offered him shelter in exchange for a night of conversation. He listened more than he spoke, absorbing the voices, the accents, the small tragedies and joys that each one carried. "Sometimes I thought about Bruce, about the temple, about the carp that must now be swimming under the thin ice of the lake. But I didn't miss it." He only felt the weight of the road beneath his feet, the wind on his face, the certainty that each step was taking him somewhere, even if that place had no name. One afternoon, he arrived at a wide, slow river, whose waters reflected the sky like a broken mirror. On the opposite bank stood a lone tree, a cherry tree whose bare branches stretched out over the water like open arms. Stone stopped. He took the cloth bundle from his pocket and carefully untied it. Bruce's 3 seeds were still there, intact. He knelt down at the riverbank and dug a small hole in the damp earth. One by one, he deposited the seeds, covering them with his hands. He didn't say any prayers, he didn't make any ritualistic gestures. He just stood there, looking at the point where the earth had been disturbed, as if waiting for something to happen. Nothing happened. But when he got up, he felt something change inside him. It wasn't relief, it wasn't peace, it was something simpler, deeper. It was the feeling that he had finally planted something that was not his to harvest. He continued walking. The road had no end. And that, after all, was all he had ever needed.